Ready? Hello, ladies, and welcome to Pride of Freak. This is the Intergenerational Conversations, and I'm so happy to see you guys here. Thank you for joining us, Unoma, Tirana, Tiffany, Marlene, and I hope it's going to be an amazing conversation. My name is Mojisola Wilson, and I live in the United States. I'm originally from Nigeria. I'm a real estate broker. I'm a social commentator, and now I'm a drag designer. Woo. We all have a lot of hats that we wear. Unoma, would you be kind enough to introduce yourself?
Yes, my name is Unoma Azua. I'm a teacher, a writer, and of course, an LGBT activist. I'm from Nigeria, and I live in the US. Nice to meet you all.
Welcome. And Taruna?
Hi, everyone. I am an LGBTI activist from South Africa, an LLM student in multidisciplinary human rights, and I currently work at the Center for Human Rights, both in the SOGS unit and with the communications and advocacy team.
And Tiffany?
Hi. I feel like I need to also say that I'm activist, but I actually don't consider myself an activist. I am an author of books about sex. And yeah, and I'm a psychology student. Yeah, that is what I am. And I live in South Africa.
Fantastic. Welcome.
Hello, everyone. I'm Marlene Oluchi. I live in Nigeria. I'm a writer, a landscaper. I also don't like identifying as an LGBT activist, but I head the advocacy and communications department at WAGE, which is an LGBTQI organization in Nigeria here. So,
you know, like a lot of you guys on the panel, thank you, Marlene. Like a lot of you guys on the panel, I never call myself, I stopped calling myself an activist. But I run African LGBTQ, which is the CEO of African LGBTQ. One of the things we do is help endangered African LGBTQs all over the world, even in the United States. But we focus on empowerment, basically education through education, and kind of sort of like the Underground Railroad. We help to move people out of the country and things like that into safe environments. But one of the things that really attracted me to the panel that I found very interesting for this particular panel is that we have an array of people. But one of the things that ties us together is the passion to help other people. So I'm going to start with Tirana. When did you realize, first and foremost, that you were LGBTQ? And I don't know how you identify. So maybe we should start with how you identify first, and then what made you, what prompted you to become an activist?
Well, I identify as a bisexual/queer person. And I think for me, I kind of came into my understanding of my sexuality quite late in life, in my late teenage years, solely because I was a bit of a late bloomer. And it was actually something that some of the women around me had picked up on, that, you know, I had a friend who at the time was also identifying as who was first identifying as a bisexual person. And she was the first person who ever came out to me. And in a lot of our conversations, she felt as if, you're so understanding. Are you sure you're also not, you know, bisexual as well? Like, because you understand my attraction to women, you understand the romantic and the physical, and you seem to understand my relationships so well. Are you sure, you know? And I think for about 2 years or so, I had to really think about it. And obviously, once I started dating and becoming more confident with experimenting and discovering new things about myself, I completed that like journey of kind of like really understanding and seeing the depth of my sexuality. And I think because I grew up in quite a open society, in my school that I went to, there were other like queer students. There was even a trans student, you know. So I didn't feel as if I was in such a closed environment that I couldn't really explore at all. So I think it was through that journey of like friendship and experimentation that I really came to understand my sexuality.
Thank you so much for that. You said you grew up in a very open area in your school. How many years ago was that? Because we're talking about South Africa, right?
Yeah, so that would have been about 8 to 10 years ago that I went through that journey. So I live in Pretoria, South Africa. And South Africa was one of the first countries in the world. It was the fifth to actually include protection for sexual minorities through our constitution. And I think I was very lucky to go to such a progressive school that was open towards its queer students. However, the reality in my country is that despite this constitutional recognition for the protection for sexual minorities and the right to equality that we have, there is a mass amount of hate crime towards people who belong to the LGBTI community, which is quite a concern. So my experience was very individual in a sense, because I know many people from my age group who unfortunately couldn't come out until later on in life, getting into the university space and kind of exiting more restrictive environments. So I recognized that I was kind of more free in a sense.
Thank you so much for clearing that up, because, you know, being from Nigeria, I'm from Nigeria, like a few other people on the panel. What we find is the exact opposite, because there is actually a law in Nigeria that, is they say it's not, the lawyers that I've spoken to say it's not anti-LGBTQ, but the law in itself is anti-same gender marriage with a 14-year jail term. So most of us think of the whole of Africa as being LGBTQ unfriendly, if you know what I mean. So thank you for clearing that up. Unoma.
Yes.
You are one of the elders. I remember when I first came out into the community, I was just sitting there thinking there was no other Nigerians that were gay. And then when I came out, all of a sudden I started meeting all kinds of people from all over. And you were one of the first people that I met. So I have to say thank you for making yourself visible for a lot of us to see. And thank you for sharing your light with a whole lot of people.
Thank you.
What was your experience growing up in Nigeria? Because for women like me that left when I was, 16, 17, it's not the same experience as those of you guys that are in Nigeria or in Africa in general. What was your experience growing up in Nigeria as a gay woman in those days? I always say those days, before computers.
For the sake of not sounding cliche, the experience wasn't a good one. At the age of 9, I realized that I didn't like guys, because at that stage, a lot of my friends were already taking interest in boys and I didn't. So that more or less made me pay attention to myself. And as I continued to grow and I got into high school, I also observed that I couldn't say that anybody was like me, but we had some kind of relationships in the corner that was named, we called it Supe then. And I went to a convent school, so the Reverend Sisters made sure that none of the girls got involved in relationships like that. And if you were caught, you would be embarrassed in the school assembly and you'd be lashed. So that again made me think to myself, okay, there's really something wrong with me. So when I left high school and I got to college, it was worse. I couldn't really find anybody I could identify with, or I couldn't find anybody I could have any kind of intimate relationship with. So those 4 years were very, very lonely. But after college, when I got to Lagos, I met a couple of women who identified as gay, but they were afraid because, of course, what will their parents say and what will people say? But I said to myself, since I'm lucky, I'm able to write, why don't I use that tool to more or less write what I conceive as wrong? So in the 90s, I started writing about LGBT issues because from my experience, I've never read or heard about anybody or anything LGBT as of that time.
Yeah. So how did you get involved with activism?
By writing about it, I remember that one of the articles I published with the Vanguard newspaper in Nigeria caused a lot of outrage. People were saying, well, who is this girl? Where is she? How dare her? She's trying to destroy the African fabric, the family-centered sense of philosophy of the Nigerian culture. And I actually got worried or scared about my life because up until then, people that knew I was gay were mostly close-knit or friends in my circle. Then I was a strong member of the Association of Nigerian Authors. So my friends knew and my family knew. But as soon as I started making it, I guess, an open business, then I was getting hate mails and verbal attacks, and at one time, physical attack. That's why I knew that I had to leave because I wasn't planning on shutting up. You know, I had made up my mind to keep talking about it and to find a community where we can gather strength, whatever it takes to keep pushing forward.
Well, thank you so much for sharing that. I'm sure it must have been a very hard work. Tiffany.
So I identify as bisexual. I think for me, my journey to figuring out, I did that thing. Oh, okay, I say that thing like everyone does it, but I did that thing where I kissed girls randomly throughout my life, but it's just fun. It's just good times. And yeah, it's only when I got to university and then under the guise of like studying sexuality for my honors, I was like, oh, you know what, this is a very interesting topic. And then I just had my first girlfriend, which again was another very interesting foray into things. And then that ended cataclysmically, as those things tend to do. But by that time, right, I feel everyone's nodding here, being like, yo, baby's first girlfriend. But by that time, I was too deep in it, right? It was my thesis, it was my feelings, it was my mind, it was my heart. So I don't think I had like any, like, I think it was always there because the evidence was always there, but it was one of those things that, like everything else I do in my life, I conceptualized it a lot. And then the more it started being a part of my work with Holla Africa, and then the things I started writing, then I got my second girlfriend, woo, wild. Like it all just like came together type thing. And yeah, so my journey to sexuality, I always feel is very cerebral, right? You know, other people go through like societal things. Mine, I was like, I'm writing a thesis about the LGBT community in Uganda. Oh my gosh, I'm a raving gay. Isn't this wild? So that was basically my journey in this whole thing.
And how did you get involved in activism, if I may ask?
So it was basically with Holla. So with Holla, the thing what we do is we create a space. So, and I didn't really know I was engaged in activism until somebody told me. They're like, what you're doing is activism. Because I always thought of activism was consciously putting yourself on the front lines, you know, marching, especially because being like living in South Africa during that time, everything is a march. Like, so I'm like, I'm not marching, I'm not picketing, I haven't started like a petition, I haven't done any of those things. I just have a blog. And this blog now has a Facebook page and Tumblr and a Twitter. And then next thing you know, I'm being invited to conferences to speak about things. And I'm like, I don't know what you want me to speak about. I have a blog. Everybody has a blog. So yeah, that's kind of how I got into activism.
You know, I'm a huge believer in individual activism. And, you know, a lot of times we don't realize the power of one. You know, one person speaking out, motivating other people to do the same, even though we're not all in a collective area. So Marlene, welcome. It's good to officially
Thank you.
meet you.
Yeah. Yeah.
So you are still in Nigeria, which makes all this
Yeah, I'm
more
here.
very interesting.
Yeah.
Would you be kind enough to tell us how you identify and then give us a short synopsis of your walk to self?
Okay, so I'm bisexual. Growing up, I'm one of those people who never really had to grow up before knowing that they like girls. So I remember my first heartbreak, I was 5. My mom had this, yeah, I was 5. I was one of those, I have a very retentive memory. I can recall things that happened when I was a child. In the family, when they want to remember something, they bring Marlene to verify. So my mom had this best friend who had a child my age. We practically lived in the same estate. And I was in love. And then when they left, I remember not eating for days. I was crying and crying. And as I grew up some years later, the attraction to girls was always there. And well, I think for me, it was a journey of realizing that, oh, okay, this is what I like, and then normalizing it. And then, of course, as a bisexual woman, back then in the university, I had to go through this struggle of, okay, if you like girls, why do you like boys? Are you confused? Are you this? And then I started reading. I read a lot of books. I think a lot of materials. I was exposed to a lot of books by my mom. So I found a lot of queer materials back then. So I think it confused me more because it felt like there's this other world out there in the Western society, and people like me are there, and then I can't find people like me here. And then we had these scenarios of, I remember back then in my 3rd year, I I came back from school and 2 girls were caught having sex apparently, and they were beaten, they were embarrassed, they were brought outside, videoed naked, forced to repeat what they were doing. And I was like, okay, no, I don't like girls. This has to go. It was horrible. But then when I finished school, I was opportune to, I relocated. I was opportune to meet, throughout that period, of course, I always dated men, and it never really felt like this is it. And even though I did not know that this is it, each one comes and I feel, okay, this is love, until I met someone and had a relationship that was so seamlessly different from every other thing with men. And that was when I realized that, okay, this is love. This is what it should feel like. This is how it should be. And well, like we say, once you embrace your queerdom, you never really go back. So that has been it for me. Then, yeah, how I got involved with activism. I met Nedima, the founder of Wage. It was Wage then, but it's Wise now. And through I began activism on Facebook, though it was just like social commentary where I talk about LGBT rights. I met a community of LGBT persons out there, and I began to have this safe space for younger LGBTQ people. Maybe someone was leaving their house, someone came out to their parents and they had issues. Someone would call me and I would take the person in. And bit by bit, I began officially working with Witch, and that has been the journey so far.
Thank you so very much. You said something that was very interesting, which is you were exposed to books very early on. You know, for women that like me that are older, you know, that's one of the things that I often tell my wife, because she grew up in Nigeria and she left Nigeria at 29. She's Nigerian as well. I often tell her how very jealous I am of her because she was able to experience being a lesbian on the motherland. Because when I at 14, I had my first relationship, 14 years old, and it was a woman, it was a girl. It wasn't a boy. When everybody liked boys, I didn't. And I kind of just went along with what society told me to do when I came to the US. I didn't come out till I was 40. So when I meet women like you, I told you that before, that I'm so very excited and happy and elated, because when you find yourself at a much younger age, you become an amazing adult because you self-actualize a lot faster. So congratulations to everybody on this panel for living their authentic lives. No joke. But one of the questions I had written down is, what is the pressure like for each and every one of you guys that are on the panel? And we can start with you, Marlene, from family and friends. When you do come out and say, hey, this is who I am, how did your family respond?
Well, I think it boils down to family dynamics. We lost our mom quite early, so as the first child, I became the mother of the house, and then over time, my dad had some health issues. So practically, the whole family, my younger ones, my dad, everybody became dependent on me. So I think that gave me a sort of leverage where, when I talk, even if you don't like what I am saying, you have to adjust to it. You can't push me to not do what I want to do. So the only thing we do is have conversations. So, you know, when when I was 21, that was 5 years ago, I finished school, and my dad started with all this indirect pressure for marriage. And then I started one day and I was like, okay, see, if you keep pressurizing me about marriage, I'm not going to talk about marriage till I'm 30. And if you mention it again, I want to hear about my career because I'm very career oriented. If you mention it again, I would leave Nigeria and I'll marry a woman. And well, this conversation took place at my cousin's wedding. And then in the hierarchy of the family, after her, I'm the oldest cousin. So everybody was expectant, looking at me to, okay, come forward with my own marriage next. And my dad was shocked. At first, maybe, I think he took it like, okay, maybe she's just talking as usual, empty threats. And then he wanted to, and I said, no, I'm serious. And that was how we had this conversation. And I think he didn't really internalize it as a reality for me until I got into my first relationship. And even though it was not someone who was out to her family, she was very comfortable being out to mine. And I think in less than a month, I sat my younger siblings down. I told them, I gave them her number. They talked to her on phone, and I was expecting some distance, maybe some religious. My younger sister looked at me and was like, okay, are you happy? I'll pray for you, but are you happy? And well, I think so far, everybody's trying to keep quiet, more or less, about my life and just watch me do my thing. But it's amazing in the silent support where when I have a partner, everybody respects and accepts that person into the family. They talk to the person, my siblings even visit. So I think it's kind of supportive and progressive on their parts.
That is very progressive, because I've heard some really, really stories. Every week we get stories at African LGBTQ of people that are kicked out because they came out. Now, do you think it's because you had power? Because that's one thing that I've been trying to preach for many, many years, which is empowerment. Become your own. You can't live in your father's house and then claim you want to come out. You have to live and abide by their rules. So do you think it's because you had power that you were able to do the things like? Okay.
Yes. Every opportunity I have to talk to queer women around, I tell them in the course of work, I tell them, if you want autonomy, if you want respect, you need to be independent. You can't depend on parents who want you to live a certain way and then expect them to support an ideology they are not used to, a lifestyle they don't approve of. They would not understand because to them it is something they don't comprehend. So you need you need autonomy. And I think even at that, a lot of people still pass through a lot of difficulties and still get kicked out. So I think, like I said, my first statement was it's all about power dynamics. Mine is different and better because somehow I am the one responsible for the family. So nobody is going to backlist their breadwinner, of course. So everybody just has to behave and,
moving. But I hope we get to it where it doesn't matter, who you are and how much money you have.
Yeah.
let me go up to Tiffany, and if you'll be kind enough to answer the same question.
So for me, it was one of those things of my partner is literally dancing in the corner. It's a mess. Like I'm just like, you see, I'm doing something. So for me, actually, there was the same thing. Like you're talking about the independence. So I live in South Africa, and a lot of my family lives in Kenya, right? And for me, I actually never came out to my family. I guess I don't know if it's that I never got the chance, or by the time I was like, I had the oomph to, I was just like, why am I coming out? Straight people don't come out. I'm just gonna bring somebody home. And if you guys ask, you ask. You don't ask, you don't ask. And this one who was sitting in the corner dancing, we went home to Kenya, and like no one asked, no one said anything. People have not asked me about marriage in eons, but the one deep sort of reaction that I got was I was actually weirdly outed on Twitter, but not in the way that you think. My mother took my old phone. So she bought herself a new phone. She was like, oh, this thing is too fancy for me. So she gave it to me, and I gave her my old phone. And so she was on my Twitter. So she was just going in my apps. And somebody had tweeted at me, hey, if Sipu wasn't your Valentine, I would be your Valentine. And my mom knew who Sipu was. That's my current partner. And she was just like, what's this? And she lost her mind. She was crying and wailing on the phone. She wouldn't talk to me for like a week. So like that was the deepest thing. And still now she like fluctuates between like, you know, acknowledging and pretending that I'm gonna marry a dude someday. And I'm like, no, I've been with this woman for 10 years. I don't think that's happening. But yeah, so like for me, my family just generally doesn't ask my business. They already feel I'm kind of rogue anyway because of like all the sex positivity stuff. So they're just like, look, Tiff does what she does. It's fine. All we know about her is she's living in South Africa. She pays her bills. She's done 2 TED Talks. We will ask her nothing. It is not our business. It is fine. So that has been like my general sort of engagement and what's like happened with the whole coming out thing. But I didn't really come out. And I don't feel like folks should put the pressure on themselves. I think like what was done where, you know, you bring a partner and stuff like that. I think that's a really great way. But now when you have feelings and you start sitting down people, that's too much for me sometimes. I'm like, no, yeah.
Is your family religious?
Yes, we're religious. I'm trying to figure out the best way to say this. Well, we're a Christian family that does not go to church as much as we could. Like my mom is the super religious one of all of us. So she goes to like church every weekend, and she's one of those who has like pastors who are her friends and no. But then she's still that person who you can sit with and polish off a whole bottle of wine and it's fine, right? So we're kind of liberal, but we still have that Kenyan thing where we're like, yeah, we're very Christian. And we're always telling each other off for not going to church. But no one's gone to church, so what must we all do now? Yeah.
Thank you so much for sharing that. You know, one of the things that I hope that people take out of this segment of the conversation is the fact being independent and having your own, you know, identity, so to speak, kind of gives you a leadway out of, you know, to be able to live an authentic life. So thank you, Tiffany. Triana, I want to ask you about coming out and all that stuff. So if it wasn't a challenge for you, it's fine. Still share the story of how, you know, your parents found out that you kind of fancied women too, because you're bisexual.
Well, I think for me, I didn't really get the opportunity to come out so much as I was outed during my matric year, because my brother had started school and I was in a relationship with a woman. And being a 13-year-old boy at that time, he faced a lot of mild bullying because of, oh, you have a gay sister. And I think it was through him that the story kind of trickled out into my family. But I think from a very young age, I kind of defied certain like norms for like young Indian women. in my community because I was very independent and self-willed. And I think from the time I was about 12 years old, my mom knew I was never planning on getting married and having children and all those conventional expectations that people normally have from like an Indian daughter. I think they saw that with this child, they're not going to be able to expect the same things. But I would say that that type of experience was very difficult for me because I felt a lot of resistance in their understanding. So I think even at this point now, it's something easier to just not confront because there is no understanding of bisexuality and fluidity in the Indian, South African Indian community. It's you're either gay or you're straight, like decide which one it is. And even the understanding of being gay comes from these very like archaic stereotypical notions of what a gay woman is like. So I every time I buy a suit, I see the fear rise up into my mother's eyes. But I think for the most part, I haven't come to a stage where I have like a serious committed partner who I'm bringing to events and things like that. So at this point, it's kind of easy for people to tiptoe around. Although I do know that there's some speculation and concern, because I'd say from a lot of my extended family, there's a lot of homophobic sentiments, just because of the environment that they come from is different from the environment that I live in. So there's that as well.
Thank you so much for sharing your story. I mean, I as I listen to a lot of your stories, it's like, it's great to have a face to a story. And it's also great that you guys are so willing to be transparent. When we started this conversation, I remember saying, you know, this is a learning period. This is a learning opportunity for myself and probably a lot of the people that will be listening on. I would like to come back in a minute after Unoma answers the same question. And I want to touch a bit on the bisexuality, because that piece in the lesbian community, and I don't really know I know a lot of Nigerian LGBTQs, but I don't know them, if you know what I mean. But in the European LGBTQ community that I belong to, there seems to be a bit of a friction between, I'm not sure if it's a definition or if it's the fear, because it is a phobia, even though a lot of people won't admit it. It took me a while to even wrap my brain around the possibility, even though I'd been with men before, but I always knew what I felt and who I was. So when I started hanging out with Nigerian LGBTQs and they're telling me that they're bisexual, it got a bit confusing. So we'll come back to that in a minute. And I hope you'll be kind enough to just educate me a little bit. Thank you so much, Triana. Unoma.
Yeah, well, in my own case, I came out so many times to my mother because it actually depended on a level of reality or delusion. I really don't know how to describe it. The first time was by accident. I was going through a horrible menstrual cramp. So she was trying to help me out with water bottles and tea. And one of the cups of tea spilled on my diary. And then she helped me to son all the items there. And of course, she read the diary and discovered that I have lots of love notes from my girlfriend then in high school. So she prepared me for deliverances. And when I got tired of the deliverances, I told her I'm healed now. And we all went back to the normal or usual life. And then at some point, I couldn't take it anymore. I told her, look, I don't think I'll be cured. You know, I'm still what I am. So she said, oh, that she thinks she's having a stroke. And I said, okay, I'm sorry, do I call the doctor? But all that was just an emotional blackmail for her to get me to be the way she's always wanted me to be, which is to be straight. So when I graduated from college, she gave me two options. It's either you get married or you get a job. I just packed up my little bag and headed to Lagos.
And the rest is history.
The rest, as they say, is history.
The rest is history, and thank God you moved to Lagos. Um, when you talk about conversion therapy, I have PTSD because I mean, I am so, it's one of the most horrible experiences of my life because for a lot of the younger generation, Unoma, it's easier for them because they've seen other people that are gay, they know other people that are out. And because of the internet and their access to social media and things like that. But for women like us, and I can't even say for women like us because everybody's experience is very individual. But for me, one of the worst things I did to myself was when I tried to commit suicide a couple of times, and the therapist was like, we need to get to the bottom, you know. And we started to dig, and I realized I didn't really like myself. And it's not because I wasn't successful, I was very successful, you know, in real estate and whatever else I was doing at that point. But I hated myself because I was this thing called an abomination by Africans and some Americans as well. We were just not lesbian. Ooh, I'm not a lesbian. And for a while, I called myself bisexual. I don't know if you remember that period. Yeah. During my transformation, you were one of the people that were there. For a moment, I thought I was bisexual because I'd been with men in the past, not realizing, and it took a lot of education for me to get to the point where I knew who I was. And once I realized that conversion therapy was never going to work, because even where all the time I'm jumping up and down and saying I'm LGBTQ, I still did not own being lesbian because it's easier to be bisexual because men still believe they can get a chance at me. So I called myself bisexual for a while. And then as therapy went on, I realized, look, you've been gay since you were 14. Yes, you slept with men, and you've been with men, but it doesn't make you bisexual. You're fully, truly a lesbian. And once I accepted that, the trajectory of my life just changed. When you talk about conversion therapy, America has banned it in many, many states, and a lot of countries are beginning to ban conversion therapy, which is usually based on religion. Are you finding that a lot of people go down that deliverance route in 2020, or has things slightly changed?
Well, from my experience and what I know till date, some families still take their daughters for deliverances because it's in the Nigerian fabric, in the context of, oh, it's an evil spirit and we need to get rid of it, you know. So it's still going on, and if it has changed, then I'll celebrate it. Maybe Oluchi can talk a little bit about that if she's aware that that is still going on or not.
Oh, it's still going on terribly. So, in fact, I think with the increasingly really religious society now, because you know the younger generation were a bit more liberal when it comes to religion. So somehow I think because of our exposure and our non-desire to be very religious like our parents, it doubled their intensity to try to conform us to religion. So a lot of young people who are very unfortunate to still be home. Oh, we have had cases where even the Muslim, we had this case at our organization of one lady who the Muslim clerics actually wash the Quran slates and force her to drink. Her mom takes her to them to submit her name to all the mosques in Kano. So it's not even just for Christians. Our own is very, very out there. And then we discover that even in the other religious sect, it's a very big thing. It's still going on. I don't see that. It will take a lot of unlearning and social advocacy for orientation for that to change in Nigeria. It will take a lot.
Yeah. I hope whoever is able to hear this recording understands that nobody can change you but yourself, and you're created the way you are. And a lot of us have gone through conversion therapy. I went so far all around the United States and then ended up in Nigeria looking to be converted because I was promised I would be cured, and it doesn't work that way. Let's talk a little bit about sexuality, right? Sexual identity. And it's something that's very important that we touch on. 3 of you guys identify as bisexual. The bisexual issue in the lesbian community, not the LGBTQ community, seems to be something that's like kerosene that's poured into a little bit of fire every time it comes up.
Yeah.
I understand what the definition, the dictionary meaning, which I'll pull up in a minute, of bisexuality is. One of the things that I found very challenging, because I'm one of, like you, that likes to do a lot of research before I touch on a topic. One of the things that I found out, or, walking in my walk with Africans, is because of the fact that the homophobia in Africa in general, a lot of women hide under that umbrella of bisexuality, as opposed to saying, look, because bisexuality means that you're attracted to either, right? Am I wrong? Anybody?
Either or, either and.
Either
and, yeah.
Either and, yeah. That either and is what I want to touch on, because bisexuality means you can be attracted to a man or you can be attracted to a woman. And monogamy has absolutely nothing to do with gender identification. So in most African cultures, what I learned, which kind of turned me off of it, is the fact that the definition of bisexuality is so wide open these days that a lot of lesbians are afraid to date. I've had this conversation on so many panels, it's crazy.
Yeah.
Bisexuals, and I want you guys to touch on that, because I think it's a misconception that's out there. It's very important, I think, that we touch on that. Oh, Tiffany, you are the sexual.
Yes. So one of the things I think it's actually based on is based in fear. And I think a lot of it is based in the fear that you will, as a bisexual, you leave your lesbian partner for a man. And I know with the whole bisexual thing, it's not even just a like lesbian woman thing. It's prominent in the gay community as well, right? This whole thing of, if you're bisexual, you might just be playing around and then you'll go back, or, you're just secretly in the closet and you're taking me for a ride type thing. And I think much as people do have that whole idea of passing through bisexualville on the way to lesbian town, right? There are some people who genuinely live there. Like, there's some people, I am actually one of those people who thought I was a lesbian. And then I was like, actually, nah, no, actually I'm not. Men are trash. Like, men are high-key trash, and they're more stressed than they're worth, but it's still a thing, right? And I think with me, what I've encountered a lot with my work, and it comes down, like a lot of the conversations I have, it comes down to sex. And you can feel, once you whittle it down to sex, you can feel that contention, and you can feel that fear, because people will say stuff like, oh, you just want to go back to dick. No, like, no. Or, I've even heard the whole thing of like bisexuals are like dirty. And if you look at it, a lot of the rhetoric centers around bisexuals being sort of like having a lack of commitment. So not only do they have a lack of commitment to their sexuality, but they have a lack of commitment to their chosen partner, right? And this idea that bisexuals will always cheat on you, they'll always go back to dick, which centers the penis a lot, because at the end of the day, everyone just wants to be with a penis. So a bisexual woman will go back to a man, but a bisexual man is only going to be gay. At the end of the day, everyone ends up like with a penis. So yeah, that's I think seeing it through a sexual lens is what helped me understand at least a good part of that fear.
But to be fair, right? I don't, to be fair to people that are gender non-conforming, because somebody just sent something up in the chat group that popped up. There are people that are gender non-conforming. There's all kinds of sexualities out there. There's, you can be polyamorous, you can be, whatever you want to be. In this day and age, the reason I brought that up, again, in the African community, a lot of women that are married date men on the side. I mean, that are married date women on the side. Bisexual. So in the Nigerian community, especially the one that I'm exposed to, that I was exposed to, what we found was a lot of my friends that are outside the country are afraid, again, to date women that say they're bisexual, because what they usually find is that there's always a guy hanging around. And I'm grateful that I hope Marlene will touch on that a little bit, just to clear that up. Because unlike a lot of you guys, you've been exposed to information. For me, it was a very hard journey. I kept bumping my head against the wall, trying to understand the African LGBTQ culture, which is so different from the European, because the European culture is so far gone, they're much more advanced than we are. And we're just kind of finding our footing in Africa. So Marlene, again, you're in the Nigerian community. For me, when I hear bisexual from a Nigerian, the only true bisexual woman that I know that's Nigerian is Yemisi Lesomi. Everybody else that I've ever met that claims to be bisexual, aside of you, because I don't know you that well, has been a woman that has a woman on the side, but also has a man on the side. And for me, that could be polyamory or anything, but then I learned not to label people. And just, you want to live your life that way, Shukuti. That's my new stand. But help me clear it up, because there's a lot of women out here looking for love, but I believe once you take a whole segment of people out, which happens to be a lot of Nigerian women, they put a lot in the sea anymore. So would you kindly help me with that one?
Yeah, I think when it comes to my personal journey as a bisexual woman, this was probably the most difficult part for me. When others had struggle with the society, struggle with family, I had struggle with the LBQ community in Nigeria, where I found myself, because when I moved away from home and started my work, this was like the only family I had where I could be my authentic self and meet people like me and see people like me. But then last year during the Global Feminist Conference in SA, I when they told me to select a topic for a panel session, I didn't have to think hard about it. Biphobia, misconceptions that fuel biphobia. I mean, I used to be very angry whenever I see posts about bisexuality. I would go there, I would type a lot of things. I had to tell myself one day, calm down. People won't hear you when you're shouting. Now, here is the thing. Bisexuality is, I used to call it a gift. I call it a gift. It's just the gift I have, that I can be able to get attracted to a man and I can be attracted to a woman. It's just attraction. I think a lot of all these misconceptions start when we reduce sexuality to sex. And I think that that cuts across all spectrums for every LGBTQI person. Homophobia, biphobia, a lot of the phobia comes from the society because they reduce everything to sex, first of all. But that is not so. In Nigeria, I had to understand that, okay, because of the society we have, because of the society we live in, a lot of lesbian women, a lot of bisexual women, they get married to men. It's inevitable. And then maybe when they come in contact with people like us, then, they are fascinated that someone out there is living the life they should be living. And somehow when they have the opportunity, they explore, and and then you meet these women who are dating other women by the side and they have their husbands. Now, that is not bisexuality. It is not it does not take away their sexuality from them, but it is no definition of bisexuality. I mean, if you come to straight people, men are married to their wives and they still chase women every day. Women are married to their husbands and they still chase men out there. Lesbian women are still there with their partners and still open to meeting other women. This is for the cheating, right? If it is cheating, it is not bisexual centric. It is not a function of bisexuality. It is who you are. Those who can be in open relationships with their partners and they decide to be with a man and a woman, it is not the function of their sexuality. A lesbian can as well be in an open relationship with her partner and they decide to explore and they date other women. That is because that is only what they are attracted to. If you are attracted to 20 different kinds of people and you have the opportunity and the willingness to explore, you would explore with all of them because that is what you are attracted to. So that is it. Whenever I meet my first girlfriend, which happens to be like the first official relationship and only relationship I've had so far with a woman, it lasted for years. And at the beginning, we had this really serious issue where she was not comfortable with me being a bisexual. And every day I wake up and I'm like, you are not comfortable with my sexuality. Why are you with me? And then a year later, she would tell me that, okay, she knows I'm very monogamous and this is it for me. But still, she still is not comfortable with the fact that I am bisexual. I should come out as a lesbian. And I'm like, no, even if I get married to you today and we spend the rest of our life together, it will never take away that part of me that can be attracted to a man. That is all it is. If as a bisexual woman, I still end up getting married with a man tomorrow, it does not take away my sexuality at all. I am what I am. And that is the function of sexuality. So cheating, whoever you date, it is not a function or a definition of bisexuality. But I get the fear. Somehow I understand because of the spectrum and the lots of women in our society who hide under the cloak of dating men, the comforts of dating men, being able to be with men and then still being with women, and the women end up suffering. If they are lesbian women, they end up suffering because, hey, you're with a partner who has her own family and her life going. But at the end of the day, it is not about her sexuality. It is about what is comfortable for her. It could as well have been a lesbian woman. So bisexuality is just the ability to be attracted to either of the sexes. That is all it is.
It's important that in forums like this that we touch on, when I see Tirina smiling, did she get it right? Is there anything you wanted to add to it?
I think I would say to people of multiple genders, because I think for many of us, we understand our orientation in a very personal way. And I know for many bisexual people that they just see it as, okay, it's my attraction to the two common genders, men or women, you know. But I see it as being attracted to people of multiple gender identities, you know, as our understanding of gender is expanding and we're seeing new identities emerge. I think bisexuality itself is also kind of transforming the understanding of it. And I think for myself, I can say that for me, it's not about the two genders anymore. It's more about the multiple genders, but it's taking into account gender identity. So my attraction could be to either a man or a woman, or a gender non-conforming or non-binary person, you know. But for someone like, say, a pansexual person, they specifically say that their attractions to people are irrespective of gender identity. Whereas I feel for bisexual people, it's because of, you know, that expression of your gender identity that fuels my attraction.
Do you think there's a similarity between a pansexual and a bisexual?
I think in many ways, yes, because these are both multi-sexual identities. And I understand that a lot of the biphobic sentiments come from both inside the community and outside of the community, from people who have monosexual orientations. So either straight men, straight women, and lesbian women and gay men. You know, people with monosexual identities have the same anxieties and the same fears, you know, towards people with multisexual orientations, like bisexual people and pansexual people. But I think at a certain point, I think I would find it maybe difficult myself to date a pansexual person who says that they don't take me being a woman in account of their attraction towards me, because I also see myself as a feminist, and being a woman is very central to my identity. So if you're going to not see that part of my identity, I think that's where bisexuals and pansexuals actually come to differ. Because I think if we return back to your first point about how many of us don't, how some of us on the panel don't see ourselves as activists. And I think for me, why I do is because being a feminist, I see how different aspects of my identity politically intersect in the world I live in. And for me, it's very important. I know that my generation of the young LGBTI community members are kind of stepping away from labels and moving away from the need to kind of define ourselves in a labeled way. For me, it's still very important because I feel like I am a political body, and I want to work for the freedoms of people who are oppressed because of the same politics that affect my body. So that's very important to me. But I do understand why people are starting to step away from labels, because there are all these expectations and stereotypes that are attached to them that ultimately like impact your interpersonal relationships. Like being a bisexual person, dating in the community, dating other queer people can get quite difficult because of always having to kind of prove your commitment towards your partner, you know, whereas your partner can come into the relationship having an automatic distrust just because of your sexuality, which I think in many ways kind of like re-traumatizes us in the same way that we get traumatized by men in our relationships with men, you know. So yeah.
I have to ask you a question real quick. I noticed a couple of times, I think Marlene used it as well. I'm not sure if I just missed the cue. The LGBTIA. I think that's what you said. May I ask why? Because here in America, well, in my circles, we use the whole acronyms, which is LGBTQIA. You've said twice LBTIA. Or did I just miss the cue?
I think I sometimes like automatically like filter out the Q because I see us all as being queer people. Although I think that for many people, they would prefer to identify as queer instead of either LBTI, you know, yeah.
Did we lose you?
Can you hear me?
Now we can. Go ahead.
Yes. Oh, I was saying that I think it's kind of unintentional for me to leave out the Q, but I do kind of see the Q as being something that stands on its own, as kind of like a new space, a new umbrella for people of queer identities, which is your non-heteronormative, non-cisgender identities, to kind of fit under without the politics of the LGBTIA space, because, as you know, it's a very contentious space, and I think many of us feel how fractured this community is every day, you know, and the pressure of having to be a queer person of whatever identity you are, the pressure of having to be a good lesbian or a good bisexual person, always being an automatic representative. I think that also kind of pushes us towards stepping away from, you know, these labels, you know, and towards embracing queerness. My generation really hates labels.
I know. I'm like, also, whoever would tell you, I get into fights with people on social media when they're like, "Oh, I don't like labels." I'm like, "Honey, I love labels. I fought so hard for my label. It cost me so much. You know, I don't want to go to the store and buy peas and then find out there's corn inside. I want to know who you are." Then I realized, wait. It took quite a while though, and we're all evolving. We're all growing like a caterpillar. They're trying to become a butterfly. We're going to have to go through so much metamorphosis. And I realized that we have to be able to grant everybody the freedom to choose what feels right for them, you know? And it took a lot for me to get there, because it took a while for me to even realize that everybody's walk is different. And if you don't like a label, that's fine. If I like people with labels, then I'm gonna date people with labels, you know? And you shouldn't have, nobody should care. No, it shouldn't bother anybody. But your generation does not like labels. And it's kind of cool in a cool kind of way, because I have a 16-year-old son who walks around, and he walks up to me one day and I said, "So, you know, I hate to ask you, but what are you going to date, women or guys?" And you know, women or men? And he looks at me like, why? What does it matter? And I'm looking at him like, what? By the time I was like 19, my father was asking me, when are you getting married? And you already know he's doing married. And here's a 16-year-old cool guy saying, you know, what does it matter? No, you know, he's like, I don't even know what I like yet. It's such an amazing time that we're living through, that people have a choice. And one thing I've learned, a lot of us, well, let me speak for myself, because I know Udoma is really cool, but for me, it took me a long time to wrap my head around it. So thank you guys for being so open on this panel today. But let's talk about transgenders while we're on the topic of the labels. In the US, there's been a lot of trans women being killed. And that seems to be the new umbrella that I picked up out of nowhere because I met a couple of trans women that I really got to know. As an African woman that grew up in the United States, of course, I was exposed to a lot more than the typical Nigerian person. So my views are kind of considered crazy in most African communities. But I've met a few South African, right now I'm talking to a young woman in Kenya who's Ugandan, and she's trans, she's having a really rough time. When she steps outside, she has to put on makeup. I mean, she has to take off her makeup and, you know, pretend to be a man or whatever the case is, or else she gets beat up. What is your thought on the trans women being considered women? As in, I now introduce myself as, hi, my name is Moji, I'm a cis, you know, lesbian woman. But most trans women don't want to be identified by the trans word, as far as I know. And I know because I did a show a few weeks ago and somebody said, one of the ladies said that. Do you guys have any problems with it? Because I don't know, I'm just trying to get the word out there, because we are all women. Because once your birth certificate is switched to a woman, or a girl or a female or whatever your gender is, in my eyes, you are a woman. What is your opinions, if anybody has any opinions? You've been picked. Anybody can take it. If you don't want to answer it, it's okay.
Well, I think it depends on, if you look at sex, as in the genitalia you come with, and then you look at gender and the way of expressing that, they're two different things, right? That you were born with a specific genitalia doesn't mean you're necessarily that. So you could be born male with a penis, doesn't mean that people should brand you male if you feel that you're female. You know, so that's where it gets complicated, or where people feel that, well, if you're born male, then you should stay male. But that is not as simple as that. Because some are born male, but they are actually in the gender expression, they are female.
So then basically, if you're a female, if you think you're a female, or if you're a female or a trans woman, then you are a female, is what you're saying.
Yes.
You and I are aligned. Anybody else?
Yeah.
Oh, go.
Okay. I think first of all, the first thing is, if you are a woman, you are a woman. If you are a trans woman, you are a woman. So as long as you identify as a woman, you are a woman. That is the first thing. But I think I've been following the conversation since last month, when the confusion, when it trended on Twitter, and the confusion between, women speaking out that they don't want to be identified as cis women, they just want to be women, came up. And I quite understand that, because personally, I won't come out to be telling you, I'm a cis bisexual woman. No, I am a bisexual woman, and I'm comfortable with that. Now, I don't have any problem, and nobody should have, I don't think anybody should have a problem with a trans woman coming out to say, hey, I am a woman. I mean, our gender is wide enough for every woman who wants to be a woman, or who is a woman on earth. So, but then I understand that people are having a lot of women who, we have a lot of gap in learning and unlearning and relearning concepts right now. And that is because a lot of women would not understand, they would argue that trans women don't have their lived experiences. A lot of women who were born as women, they won't accept that, because they have a problem with that, because they feel trans women don't have their lived experiences. And trans women tell them back that, hey, I might not have your lived experiences as a woman, but I have my journey and my lived experiences as a woman too. So I think that is where the confusion comes in, where we now have to have this gap. But then why do we need lived experiences to define our gender? That is where I come in.
The reason why I brought it up is because there's a post that's trending on social media today, because a feminist posted something about Bobrisky, who
Mavis.
You've seen it, right? And I can't
Mavis.
comment, and I made a post on my page as well, because we cannot no longer define women by the fact that they can have a period or they can have babies. My wife is a lesbian woman, and she's she chose not to have children. Does that make her less of a woman? And if Bobrisky is standing there saying I'm pregnant, why are we all getting upset? But that's another story altogether. But feminists are coming up saying a trans woman cannot claim to be a woman because they're pushing the envelope too far. If I wake up tomorrow and decide I'm going to be, I feel like a man on the inside and I want to be a man, and I go through that work, because it takes work. Most women are just born women. For you to become a woman, you have to go, as a trans woman, you have to go through so many changes. And then the issue came up where somebody did this write-up and it got picked up by the bloggers, saying that, a trans woman doesn't have the same experience as a cis woman, yada, 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 and they're mocking them. And I'm like, you know how hard it is to get surgery to look like a woman and feel like, and then take hormones?
Exactly.
But on that note, will any one of you, are you opposed to dating a trans woman if you're bisexual or lesbian? Unoma, you go first.
Well, I'm actually attracted to the feminine energy. So wherever I find it, I go for it. Be it trans, be it cis, I don't discriminate.
Tiruna?
Definitely not opposed to it. I think as cis women, we don't have the monopoly on defining what the shared experience of womanhood is. And I think for anyone, it's the most important thing is to allow people to self-identify, so whoever it may be, if they identify as a woman, we are not here as feminists to police your expression of gender, to police your identity, because that's not feminism at the end of the day. That's just playing into that patriarchal policing of gender roles and gender norms, which we're trying to break free from. So for me, I'm not opposed. In fact, I celebrate it. And I think that at this point, transitioning is a very, very brave thing to do. You need a lot of courage to transition, especially in our African communities, where there's so much violence that's posed towards trans individuals. So I think that for us, we shouldn't be sitting and debating, what's going on with other people's genitals. Because I think another issue is then, like, where are trans people in the conversation that people keep having about trans people and their right to self-identify, their right to identify with being a woman or being a man. I think in a way we kind of also silence trans people in many spaces, and the trans community itself is always facing the worst of the violence against the LGBT community.
Exactly. And Tiffany?
So yeah, I'm gonna second that whole vibe of the need to have folks in conversations like this. Because right now, when you asked that question, my heart went poof, because I was like, this feels like when white people are discussing something and they're like, what do you guys think about Black people? And you're like, no, we need somebody at the table to speak on the thing. So I was like, for me, I was just like, no, if you don't have trans women in your feminism, in your spaces, then your spaces are trash. But in terms of dating a trans woman, I would. My only hesitation would be making sure that I have the tools to emotionally support somebody and to to understand their lived experience. And also I'm not in a space where I feel like I must speak on their lived experience, because there is, having done like a lot of the work I've done, there is an intricacy to it, and there's an intimacy to it, and there's things to understand that I would have to, and I feel like I do the work, but I feel like there'd be a lot more work to do. And yeah, but I am not opposed to it. For me, it's a bit of a strange question. Like, yeah, it's just, it makes me so uncomfortable, the question, but I know I personally have to do a lot of work, because like holding somebody's space, especially holding somebody intimately through, their experiences, and especially like the way we've been talking, how, the fact that debates around transness and debates around womanhood, and also just the violence that trans women face. Yeah, like it would have to be a case of making sure that, I'm ready to hold that, and I have the tools to hold that, because I wouldn't want to do someone's child harm because I'm just nonsense.
It's very important that this authentic kind of conversations are had. And the reason being, if this conversation was just between us, it wouldn't even matter what we talk about, right? But people are going to be listening. People all over Africa, hopefully, and the world will be listening, and hopefully we'll be able to, shed a light on things that people are thinking of. And when we talk about women, when this conversation was brought up, I was one of the people that said, look, I think we should bring trans women in to the panel. It's very important. But then they decided to have a different recording with trans people. Because when we're talking about trans being part, because I have a lot of friends that are lesbians and they date trans women. And when we go out, we're just women, if that makes any sense. So, yeah. But Triana is raising her hand, I heard.
Yes, I think I just wanted to say that it's very easy for us to recognize our privilege as cis women by having to answer the question, would we date a trans woman? Because for trans women, that's not a question that they ever have to think about, because most of their partners will be cis women, if they're same-sex loving women. And the same goes for us in the community. Our straight partners would never have to think about, would I date a queer person? But for us, like that's in a sense just exposing our privilege and exposing our straight counterparts' privilege of where they kind of expect to date someone who's also straight, and we also kind of almost expect to date people who are cis, so that kind of exposes the privilege.
It is a privilege to be able to even think that we have a choice really, but when you think about it, when I think about relationships, female to female, it's a spiritual connection, it's a erotic connection, but it's more than just physical. And it takes a while for people to get to that point. And it took me a long time to get to that point where when I see a woman, I'm seeing a woman, it doesn't matter what the packaging, it's a spiritual connection. And for a lot of people, they're not there yet. And I totally respect that but this is an argument that's going on in America right now, in the lesbian community. I mean, I'm on social media fighting people, trying to educate them, and it's not working because, well, if you say well, you're lesbian and you're attracted to a woman, or you're bisexual and you're attracted to some women or women, then women are supposed to be women. But I totally respect and understand people that are uncomfortable. Unfortunately, we live in a very uncomfortable world, and the only way to educate people is by talking about it. You guys literally just scolded a whole bunch of people that will listen to this, so I appreciate your input onto the topic, because without education, a lot of people don't know where to understand us as the LGBT, as lesbians, let alone as trans women that are lesbians. Does that make sense? So let's move on a little bit and talk about dating. Dating. I'll start with Marlene because you're already on the screen. Let's talk about how hard is it to date as a lesbian woman in Nigeria, because you live in Nigeria.
As a bisexual woman in Nigeria, well, I will I would say it's difficult in a sense, especially the most difficulty I've had is in having a partner who is still learning, and she's still first of all, she's still learning about herself. She's still rediscovering herself, and then at the same time, there's the whole biphobia surrounding it. I've been in spaces where I had to leave physically and online in Nigerian queer women spaces because of the bisexual thing. It's always as if you are not lesbian, you don't really belong, and you won't really belong. So it kind of, for me personally, that constituted a problem, because then you have to meet women, and when you meet someone, you have to start proving yourself, proving your authenticity, and proving why they should date you, even though you have been with a man or you can be with a man. So it's a whole lot of struggle. And then even though you're out, you still have to face, even if you don't have to fear the legal consequences of being with a woman, you still have to face society. No matter how accepting family is, at some point there's still this liberty that straight people around you have that you won't really have. No matter how accepting they are of your partner, it won't be the way they accept straight partners. You can't go for some functions with your partner. You can't, obviously, for someone like me who is big on PDA, you have to tone it down in public, and then you turn and you see straight couples holding hands, kissing, being themselves. And it's a continuous struggle that we take one day at a time. Today you hold hands comfortably on the street, and then, you know, if this was just a female friend, you won't even think about it, you won't feel uncomfortable. But once it's your partner, you have this awareness that won't naturally be there, and you have to pause and, well, look around to see if people are looking at you, be mindful of how you talk to avoid mobbing or verbal attacks, or, well, physical attacks still happen in some circles. But personally, I try to go into safe spaces. I limit the kind of places I go to for my safety. So it's still very challenging, no matter how open you are, no matter how out you are. It's difficult. It's difficult. Yeah.
I hear. And it's one of the things that breaks my heart about the LGBTQ community in Nigeria, because even, I mean, when I first came out, I thought, you know, what's the big deal? But then I realized from a young woman's story that was one of my mentees, she actually committed suicide later. And she had a girlfriend on the side. And, you know, one day I was talking on my show, like I always do. And I'm like, look, you have to have the courage to just walk, because, you know, and she did. She got up and she walked, and she was shunned by everybody. Family, friends, even people that she and her were in the closet with, because now that she came out, all of a sudden, every time people see them with her, she's outing them allegedly, and it became very lonely and secretive and all that stuff. So that kind of changed my mindset on the whole coming out thing, you know, because when you're trying to fight a war, you can fight a war behind the closet. That's just the way I feel about it. But unfortunately, because people are in Africa, they have to be safe. They have to create safe spaces. And South Africans, I heard, don't have that much of a problem in this area, because, of course, you have laws that protect you guys. And unfortunately, for those of us that are like in Uganda, maybe even Kenya, maybe and Nigeria, we don't have laws that protects our rights as LGBTQ people. They actually want to jail us or kill us. Unoma, I hate to keep coming back to you with these old-time questions, but unfortunately I have to. You know, in the past, because when I talked to my wife, who was a medical doctor in Nigeria at the age of 21, and she's dating like high-ranking officials in the government and things like that. But of course, you know, nobody was out. My question to her in the past was, you know, we were talking one day, and I'm like, you mean there were gay people in Nigeria? She's like, of course, you know. I'm like, how did you guys meet? How were you able to meet people? back then, as opposed to social media days now, that you just Google?
Well, for me, it was more like a trial and error thing. And then you pray that when the error occurs, you're not lynched. So for instance, how I used to find out who I could date was there was a party I attended as a member of the Association of Nigerian Writers. So at the end of the reading, we all had to do the social thing, eat and talk and mingle and then dance. So of course, while the dancing started, the men would dance with the women and everybody was pretty much paired up. But there was a woman I had an eye on, and fortunately for me, she couldn't find a dance partner. So in that setting, since we were both not paired up with a dude, we started dancing. And while we were dancing, I complimented her. You know, I love your shoes. I love your lipstick. Where did you get it from? And she told me, and I said to her, well, you're beautiful. And she looked at me and she smiled and said, well, you're beautiful too. And I said, okay, do you find women attractive? I had to pick up the courage to go that far. And she said, well, wherever there's a good drop of soup, I lick it.
Whoa.
So that was a cue. That was the cue for me. And then after the party, we started talking, and I discovered she's bisexual. So that was how I had one of my relationships in Lagos. So fortunately, she has friends who are lesbians as well, and some bisexual. So we found some kind of community in Lagos. But of course, I was the only one who was accused of being too flippant about my sexuality. So what we did for each other was to kind of hook each other up with other lesbians we could find. So it was a very small circle, but with time, it expanded to even married women who are lesbians, but also wanted lesbian girlfriends on the side.
Wow.
So yeah, it was more like, well, test the waters and see if it's safe enough for you to swim in. And if it's not, you step back and keep trying till you get lucky, which is very challenging and very difficult when you compare that to a straight guy or a straight girl.
I was hoping there would be a few butch women. I don't know how you guys identify. I know you don't like labels for the younger generation, but how do you identify? The reason I bring that up is, there's a lot of, I speak to a lot of butch Nigerian women because they have a lot of issues finding partners. Not only just finding partners because of being a lesbian, but because of the way they look. And when you have a masculine center, I've learned that it can be very challenging in Africa to survive as a lesbian a woman or even a bisexual woman. I don't know how you guys identify, but Unoma, can you touch on that a little bit?
Well, I identify as a lesbian, and sometimes I envy bisexual women, and I don't mean to sound like Oliver Twist, but I envy bisexual women because in the conditions that I grew up in, it would have been easier for me. Not that I regret being a lesbian, but if I were bisexual in Nigeria, I think a lot of the problems I faced wouldn't have been there. And I still feel that lesbians find it more difficult. And this is not to diminish the experiences of bisexual women, because you get to a certain age and you're asked, well, when are you going to get married? And of course you don't want to get married, but how do you tell your family that you don't want to get married? So how long are you basically going to lie to your family that your best friend is actually your lover? But where in a situation of being a bisexual, maybe one day you fall in love with a guy, and that more or less solves a problem.
I got married at 36. My sisters were getting married. They were 20, 19. I mean, everybody was, and I'm the first child. And I kept saying, I'm not ready. I don't want to. And eventually I gave up and just said, you know what? Okay. And I married the first human that came along. So I totally understand that. If you had to give, and I'm going to ask Unoma this because we have to round up in about 6 minutes or so. If you had to give an advice to a young lesbian woman that's coming up in Nigeria or in Africa, in a country where, the LGBTQ support is not there, what would you tell them?
I'll tell the lesbian woman to try as much as she can to be independent, get a job, get something that can pay your bills. In situations where you cannot, then gauge the security or comfort you can get from home. You may be able to be out to your mother, to your sister, to your brother, because at a point it becomes a survival thing, which saves you the expectation or the insistent question about, well, where's your boyfriend or who are you going to get married to? So you come out to your friends, come out to your parents, just gradually, because staying in closet is suffocating. But where you cannot afford to, then that's fine. You understand? But just try as much as you can to be able to be a person of your own and be able to pay your bills, because then your voice gets louder as a queer, lesbian, or bisexual woman.
Thank you so much for that. And Tarina?
I think my advice would be to any young queer women is to, I think, first be strong in your understanding of yourself. There's no pressure to come out immediately, you know, when you start to understand something about yourself. It's a journey, and coming out is not an essential part of the journey. I think another thing I would say is really focus on your mental health. And things that will benefit your mental and personal well-being. So if you can, I know that some communities can be difficult spaces to navigate, but if you can find, like, you know, a safe community for you, you don't have to rely on your family or queerphobic friends to be your only support system when they are kind of not as supportive or understanding of your identity. And I think maybe also do a bit of research and become aware of organizations that work in your country. If you live in a country where it's perceived that being queer is outlawed, often it's the same-sex consensual sex between adults that's criminalized, but the perception is that it's the identity that's criminalized. Even if you live in a country that has those laws in place, there will be organizations that are active, you know, that are trying to provide support to young LGBTI plus people. So try and find those organizations so that even if you were to face any difficulties, you do know who to make that call to for assistance. You know, I think it can become very isolating to be a young queer person in a space that isn't tolerant of your identity. So making those connections can often be a lifeline, you know, for many.
Thank you so much. Tiffany?
Well, you went and stole all the best material, didn't you? I was also going to say community. Community is a really, really important thing. And because it can really help you figure out who you are, and it's also a safe space, predominantly a safe space, but that is a conversation for another day. And just financial independence. And I know that's not the easiest thing to also accomplish, but sometimes when you can just tell people, you know what, I don't need this. I'm going to my house where I stay with my girlfriend. Peace. Bye. Like, there's something really, really powerful about that. And it's really, really tragic that the only way we can sometimes get mental, like, peace of mind and stuff like that is by essentially clawing our own space. But I think having a space that is safe for you, again, even with the whole idea of finding organizations, finding a place that's a lifeline, and just there's something about knowing you're not by yourself, right? And knowing that you're not alone, and not only just like physically, but also digitally. I have seen some like Nigerian Instagrams creating incredible networks. So those networks can also lead to, you know, offline networks. So if you're watching this, chances are you have access to a computer of some sort. So yeah, just finding online networks, and then those online networks leading to offline networks. Also good places to find like partners sometimes, but obviously keep it safe. Yeah, I think community is so, so important for personal growth and fulfillment.
Thank you so much. Thanks, Tiffany. Marlene?
Yeah, everyone has said basically what I would have said. So basically, if you're a woman who loves women out there, it's visibility is priceless, but at the same time, um, it's your journey. It's an individual journey. Don't be pressured. If it's not about convenience. It's about your safety, and not just physical safety, your mental safety. A lot of the pressure comes from mental pressure from everyone around you when you come out. So please make sure you're in a better place. Make sure you are in a place where you can handle being out and being on your own, and then embrace your authentic self. And it does get better. It's better than it was a few years ago, and well, we are working on it, and we hope it will be totally good in a short while. So basically, try to live.
L-I-V-E, not L-E-A-V-E, right? Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you now.
Yeah, I mean, trying to live, that is that to me is very profound, because you don't have to be out to live. You can be, in the closet and still live your authentic life. I'm grateful that you brought that up, because it's important. In as much as we want more people to be visible, especially in the Nigerian community with the laws and stuff that governs us, that I'm a strong believer in the power of numbers. And the more visibility we have, the more people have the opportunity to see that their friends and the cousins and this and that and lesbians. It brings a lot more tolerance. For those of us that are sitting in the limelight every day and getting slaughtered and pelted with stones and words, it is what it is. But if we all keep doing what we're doing, hopefully we'll be able to create a better tomorrow for the generations coming behind us, so they don't ever have to go through what we went through to become our authentic selves. Unoma, thank you so very much for taking the time out to have this conversation with us. Taruna, it's a pleasure to meet you. I really appreciate you and your contribution. And the doctor, sex doctor, I'm going to inbox you and try and find some of your books. I like to learn, I just don't want to talk about it. But Tiffany, thank you so very much. And Marlene, thank you so much for joining us. This is Pride Afrique. We thank you for joining us today. Namaste.